Kabbalah hats. Okay, Yaakov went out from Be'er Shava and he went to Charan. It's known the very many analyses of this. Admor Azokim, Admor Amtsoy, from the Alter Rebbe and the Mittler Rebbe, V'chulu, etc. One of the questions that they ask is that he concludes the idea that he begins the Parsha Vayetze Yaakov with the Psukim, and I will return in peace to my father's home, and this rock that I placed as a monument, and then he concludes, everything that you will give me, I will give you Meiser, I will give you a tenth. But we need to understand that if Vayetze Yaakov who loyrak hascholas haparsha elagam hascholas inyanal shemesayim psuk manal. The idea that Yaakov went out is not just the beginning of the entire parsha of Vayetze, but it's also the beginning of this topic that we just now said about returning to his father's home. He'll make the rock into a monument. He'll give Meiser. But we need to understand what's the connection between Yaakov going out to the conclusion that it says, I will return to my father's house, the rock that will become a monument, and everything you give me, I will give Meiser. That's one question that the Rebbe says. We need to understand it says that this rock that I place as a monument, how can a rock, which seemingly is the lowest thing, become a monument for Hashem? So the Rebbe says in the second paragraph, the explanation of this matter is, in Yaakov, maybe concerning Yaakov, the Mittler Rebbe brings down, when the Rebbe said the Maimer hu Yom Hagula Shaloi was the Frierdiker Rebbe's day of redemption, the 10th of Kislev, Yaakov, who Yud Ekev. The name Yaakov is a combination of the letter Yud with the word Ekev or Okev, meaning heel. This means that the Yaakov is the idea of the Yud, Hainushu Mamshechas Ayud, he draws down the letter Yud, which also in the Spheres refers to Chochmah, because Chochmah is like a point of an idea. It's not yet a fully developed concept, which is also spiritually the Reishis HaYishtalshelus, the beginning of Seder Yishtalshelus. Chochmah is the first of the 10 spheres, and that's the first of the 10 spheres, and the first of the 4 Oilumis, Atzilus B'ri Yitzir Asiyah. Ad lemata matl b'chinas hakvayim, until way down below, to the level of the heels. The Zel Vayetze Yaakov, that's what means Yaakov went out. Shuam Shochas HaYud, it's the drawing down this letter Yud, Be'er Shava, from Be'er Shava, Ve'el Charon, he went to Charon. What's the idea of Charon? So the Chazal say, L'mokim shesham charon av shel olam, to the place where the anger of the entire world, meaning of Hashem and the entire world, is focused and is expressed. So in other words, it shows on a great descent from the beginning of Seder Yishtalshelus till the lowest most levels. So this will be understood by first prefacing what David HaMelech says in Tehillim, I will raise up a cup of salvation, or salvations. Because Yeshua, we need to understand the idea of the raising up in this cup of Yeshua. This is also what it says, that he will command Yeshuas of Yaakov. The Yeshuas who Shin Ayin or Shin Ayin Hey Noherim in Kabbalah, the word Yeshua, salvation, shows on a very high level, either 370 lights or 375 lights. Yeshua is the Shin Ayin or Shin Ayin Hey. The word Yeshua, Shezeu Reishis HaYishtalshelus, these very high lights either refer to the beginning of Ishtalshelus, which is Chochmah, or even these lights are referring L'mayla Mishtalshelus, even higher than the chain order of descent. Keser, Atik V'Arich, it's referring to the inner level of Keser, the outer level of Keser. The Zeu Inin Yeshuas Maloshin Sha'ah. That's the idea that Yeshuas is in the word Sha'ah. Sha'ah means Pana. He's turning, like someone turns to someone. says right away in the beginning about the carbon of Cain or Hevel, that he was sha'ah to the carbon of Hevel, loy sha'ah to the carbon of Cain. It's the idea of turning to it. What does turning have to do with Shin Ayin Hey Nahoid in the beginning of Seder Ishtalshus? Shezeu inyan atafnis harishoina der erster ker shel atzmos ein sof yisborach la'olamas. It's the first turn, it's the first move like that Hashem makes towards the worlds. But us, once you have the level of the Shah, the Yeshuais, so then Omer says, Save Yeshuais Yaakov. Command Yeshuais of Yaakov. The Tzave, you Maloshan Tzavs of a Chibur Tzave, as we always bring down concerning a mitzvah, is from the word togetherness, joining. That he joins and draws down the level of Yeshuais, this highest, most level, Keser, Atik, Are, Chachma, down below. Afilu b'chinas Ekev, like we said before, Yud Ekev, even into the heels, the level of Yeshua is the level of the most highest level. V'hinei tzave Yeshua is hu inyan hakli lakabolas hamshachas haYeshuas. The joining of the Yeshuas is the vessel for receiving this drawing down of the Yeshuas. Concerning this, he says, a cup of Yeshuas I will raise up, so that the cup should be able to receive this idea of Yeshuas. There has to be the preparation of this vessel. We need to take the vessel and raise it up. That's why it says Kais Shuis Esa. Only then could you have the Tzavi Yeshuis Yaakov, the joining of the level of Yeshuis all the way to the lowest, most level. Top of the second page. This will be understood according to what's brought down, the well-known mimer of the Mittler Rebbe, that's titled to understand the silver goblet that says about Yosef and Binyamin, that Yosef, when the brothers brought Binyamin to Mitzrayim, Yosef hid away his silver goblet in the sack of Binyamin. He explains the difference between the silver goblet that's found specifically in the load, in the sack of Binyamin, the small one, it says. That's what it says in Chumash, that it was hidden away in the sack of Binyamin, the small. The emphasis on the word small over here. And comparing that goblet, that silver goblet, to the idea that a cup of salvation I will raise up. Though both of these are vessels, Kais Yeshuis as a cup, Gevia HaKesef, the silver goblet, is a goblet. They're both vessels. Still in all, where does the goblet find itself? The silver goblet comes down in the sack of the most smallest one. In other words, it's talking about drawing down from above to below. On the other hand, because Yeshua is Sarach Lias Agbo, as opposed to the cup of salvation, we say Eso, you need to raise it up. So the question is, if they're both vessels, why is this vessel drawing down from above to below, and the other vessel is about raising up from below to above? מבאר שם, and the Mittler Rebbe explains, the Zohar Hefresh between David and Yosef. These two levels are the difference between David and Yosef. Who placed the Gevia HaKesef in the sack of Binyamin? That was Yosef. And who says Kais Yeshuis Esa? That's David HaMelech in Tehillim. So this reflects both of their levels. The Kais Yeshuis Esa, Amar David Almidaso, Yeshubechinas Malchus. Kais Yeshuis Esa, David said about his character trait, that David corresponds to the level of Malchus. And we know the sphere of Malchus applies what it says, that Ragleha Yordis Mavis, that its legs descend into death, meaning that Malchus is Yeredis Lebia Lebri Tzirasiya. Since Bri Yitzira Asiya is already created. It already has a certain degree of separation from Hashem. Hashem is the true source of life. So Biyah, Bri Yitzira Asiya, is like death. So Malchus, which inhabits and comes down from Atzilus into Biyah, is called Ragleh Yerdis Mavis. Its legs descend into death. Therefore, concerning this kais that David is referring to himself, this kais of Yeshua has to be Esau, Shu Inyan Hagba, because you have to raise up this kais, you have to lift up Malchus, that it should arise out of its state of being a Bri Yitzira Asiya. Mash Enkin Inyan Hagviyah Shezeu, Zeu Shal Yosef, Shu Inyan Tzadik Elyon. Who did the goblet belong to? It belonged to Yosef. Yosef is known as the supernal level of tzaddik. It says that in Kabbalah, Chassidus, that Yosef was tzaddik elyon, Binyamin was a lower tzaddik, tzaddik tachten, which tzaddik elyon corresponds to Zeir Ampin, the midas of Atzilus. Protis Yosef, Inyan HaYesoid. Specifically, the level of Yosef, tzaddik elyon, has to do with Yesoid. As we know, Yosef was called Yosef HaTzaddik, and also tzaddik Yesoid Olam. So we see that the sphere of Yesoid has to do with the level of Yosef. So the Gevia, the goblet that was placed in the package, in the sack of Binyamin, that was coming from Yesoid. Yosef Yosef is the one that the pasuk says supplied food to the entire earth. In other words, Yosef is the one that gives and is mashpia. That the true idea of a mashpia. The Rebbe points out, what's the true idea of a mashpia? Not like Malchus, that Malchus descends into Bri Yitzira Asiya, but she'eina yored le'inyan ha'mekabel behashpa'asoi. A true idea of mashpia is he does not descend to the level that receives from his hashpa'ah, ela mashpia mem koimoi. He gives from his place. A true teacher doesn't start acting like a student. A teacher has to be on the level of a teacher and has to perform as a teacher. And from their state of being a teacher and more elevated than the student, and they need to be given respect by the student and so on, that's how it gives over. So since this Gavia HaKesef, the silver goblet that belonged to Yosef, came down into the world of Binyamin, the Katan, the minor one, but Yosef did not lose himself in the Hashpah. Therefore, there's no need to raise up that silver goblet, because on its own it's already high. Like the mashpia on his own is in a removed state and higher than the receiver. Just the opposite. It's found in the package, in the sack of the Binyamin, the minor one. He could take this down, he could communicate this lower without it becoming lowered in the process. The Rebbe goes on, says in the second paragraph, we can connect this to what the Alter Rebbe himself says in Torah Oir. When it talks about the making of the Aron, so it describes Kruv Echad Mikotzim Izeh. There was one Kruv, that image, that form of a Malach, with children's faces that were on top of the Aron from one end of the Aron, the Kruv Echad Mikotzim Izeh, and another Kruv from the other side of the Aron. So in Chassidus it's explained, the Alter Rebbe explains in Torah Oir, the Kruv Echad Mikotzim Izeh Zeir Ampin. The Kruv on one side, that's the midas of Atzilus. The Kruv Echad Mikotzim Izeh, the Kruv on the other side, Zeu Inyan Malchus. It's the level of Sfiras HaMalchus. And the Rebbe is going to explain this in connection with the word at this end versus at that end. That you have two ends. one kruv is an end of one thing, and one kruv is an end or an edge of another thing. So he says, the Zah ubepratis bechinas yisoid hariwa darga achroina be'ein sof. Zeir ampin, the 6 midas, and specifically the final one of the 6 midas, which is yisoid. That's the final level of the infinite light of Hashem, the way it shines down into Atzilus. Aval, but alongside that we call it the final level, the Yosei Ein Sof, since it's infinite, the beginning, its middle, and its bottom, everything is infinite. So again, it's a higher level. There's no need to raise it up. And it comes down in the way of going from above to below into Bri Yitzirasiyah with no need to elevate it, because the Mashpia remains in the Mashpia's place. Malchus, he has Cholos ha'olam. Malchus is the beginning of the worlds, meaning it's the highest end of the worlds. That's why it's called Kruv Echad Mikotza Mizeh. It's the highest, most level of the worlds, the highest, most end of the worlds going upwards. Therefore, Malchus is called below in comparison to the level it's above it. And therefore, so too it's in the difference between the cup of salvation to the silver goblet, the silver goblet, that's the level of the sphere of Yisoid, the last one of the 6 midas of Zeir Anpin, Shemekabel, Kol Ha'eretz V'Gilui Ma'al Yonim. It receives all the lights and revelations of above, Mashpiad Lamata Mata, and it gives it over till very, very much below. Rashi in Chumash, in Parshas Miketz, explains the word Gevia, that's from the word height. Kois Aruch, a long cup. The Hainu Sheyored Lamata Mata, it's a long and narrow type of, I think it's called in English, a flute. This type of long and narrow thing indicates that it's something to draw down from above to below. Mash'enkim, because Yeshua is opposed to the cup of salvation, which is Malchus. This needs to have in it a raising up. Mashal was the metaphor used for this, whether there has to be Hamshacha coming from above or Alam al-Matal an elevation from below. Like two people that are standing. One is standing at the top of a mountain. And the second one is on the bottom of the mountain. Either the one on top has to descend below, or the one below has to ascend above. Or another option is I should call echad yagia la'em tahar, that or either each one should reach the middle of the mountain. The top one goes down to the middle, and the bottom one goes up to the middle. The zau inyan hagba, because the going from the bottom to the middle, that's the raising up of the cup. And where do they meet up? They meet up by Spheres HaYisoid. Shezau inyan kikoil bashumayim of ha'aretz. We say this in davening, L'cha Hashem ha'gdula v'ha'gvura v'atferes v'ha'netzach v'ha'hoid kikoil bashumayim v'ha'aretz. Kikoil bashumayim v'ha'aretz is going on Spheres HaYisoid. Gdula, gvura, tiferes, netzach, hoid, that's the first 5 spheres of the midos. Koil bashumayim v'ha'aretz is going on the sphere of Yisoid. The Targum translates it, the Ochid, Targum Yonason translates it as the Ochid B'Shemayim V'Ara. Koil B'Shemayim V'Ara, it means the one that joins heavens and earth, which he said also, that's the meeting place of heaven and earth that we just now said. It's the point, it's the center point where the Gevia Kesef comes down to and the Malchus rises up to. Because it joins both of them together, Yisoid, which is that level of that silver goblet, does not need to be raised up. Therefore, the Medrash says, when Mashiach comes, it says on the famous meal, the Sudus Alav Yosem, that David HaMelech is going to be the one honored with benching. How come? Because when Mashiach comes, my cup will be overflowing. The Akoishu Bechinas David. Malchus, the cup which that represents David, Spheres Malchus, Yikabel and Bechinas Revoya will receive from the level that's called Revoya. Revoya is the numerical equivalent of 221. Gematria Reish Chof Aleph. She'isal Zeb Gemara Shezel Gematria Reish Chof Aleph. Vu Inyan Arich. Arich, the level of Arich Ampin, if you just leave out the Yud, and in certain gematrias you can leave out letters that are not pronounced, so the Arich is Reish Chof Aleph also. Yum Shakva Malchus, that will come down into Malchus. So what you have is, ordinarily, Malchus has to be raised up. But in the case of Mashiach's times, Arich, the higher, the level that we said is so high, is going to come down into Malchus. The Dafke Achshva Malchus Ibedargish Tzarchli is Kaisishu says only now. The Malchus is on such a level that we need to have we raise up the cup of salvation. I will also love it, but in the future when Mashiach comes, in Mitzada Gilui the Arich, she is Galva Malchus, because the revelation of Arich that will become revealed in Malchus. There won't be any need for Malchus to join up, like we said before, that two people have to join up in the center of the mountain. They're going to join up in the middle. He's going to bypass that. That's why when Mashiach comes, it's specifically David that's going to benching, because he has this very high level, the level of Arich that shines in him, higher even than what Zeir Anpin has. So now the Rebbe is going to connect it with our avoider now. So he says in the second paragraph, in Yedua, it's known, Shekola and Yom Losid Lavi, all matters that take place when Mashiach comes, Tluyim, Baba is saying, Meshach Mana Golos, are dependent on our service throughout the time of Golos. Dine Malchus, Bavoida the Achshav, Hu Inyan, Atfil Malchus in our present day avoida is the idea of davening. The Malchus Nekras Nefesh. Malchus is also called in Kabbalah the idea of soul. Ve'lecha Hashem Nafshi Esa. Same thing. David Malch says, Nafshi, the level of Malchus, Esai will raise up. What is the Nafshi Esa and the simple meaning of that pasuk mean? It means davening. I'm raising my soul and davening to you. Shizel, not tefillah, that's davening, because davening is halom al-mata l'mayla. In general, davening is about raising up from below to above. There's the idea of drawing down from above, similar to what's going to be when Mashiach comes. And that's the idea of Torah, shemil mayla mata. Torah is from above to below, because as many of Amarim explain, it's Hashem's words being communicated to us. From the heavens I spoke with you. Through our service during the time of Golos, will become revealed in the future the level of Arich that we said before. That's the Kaisir Revoya, the numerical equivalent of Arich. Now the order is, the mashpia is higher, the makabel is lower. In other words, Yisoid, Zeir Ampin is higher, that's the mashpia, and Malchus, the receiver, that's lower. Therefore, the male is higher than the female. The numerical equivalent of Hashem's name that comes out to the number 45, when it's also added the letters inside, like Yud Vav Daled, Vav Al Vav, and so on. That's Shem Ma, it's called. And that refines and elevates Shem Ban, another level, which has to do with Malchus. Another level of Yud Ke Vav Ke has to do with Spheres of Malchus. And then there's another idea of Afilu Kishaban Mevarer, is a Gamke idea Ma. Even when Ban does do Birurim, it's also by the power and capability of Ma. Bein B'Bir Rishon, B'Frat B'Bir Sheni. There's Al Pi Kabbalah, I'm not going to go into this right now. A first refinement and a second refinement. It's like in gold, that first you get, or any precious metal, first you have to get rid of the coarse schmutz that's blocking any thing that you take out of the earth, and then you have to refine it a second time. So all of these refinements at present is only thanks to Shem Ma, which shows on Zeir Ampin higher than Malchus as opposed to Ban. And which means that the Mashpia is now higher than the Makabel. That's the way it is now. Therefore, the Chazal say, at present, it is the manner of a man to conquer. But a woman is not the one whose method and whose manner is to conquer. But after, in Mashiach's times, after all the refinements will be done, Ma and Ban, Mashpia Mukabel, will be equal in stature. Even more so, Shaban Yiha Iker, that the Makabel, the level of Ban, Malchus will be primary. The Ban Yilamayl Mimad, that Malchus will be even higher than Zeir Ampin, than Ma. That's what we have in the Navi. It says, Bara Hashem Chadasha Ba'aretz, that Hashem created something new in the land, Nekeva Tesoivev Gever, that the female will encircle the male, will be higher than the male. And the same thing in the spiritual level as male and female, David, which is Malchus, is the feminine. That will be higher. L'chein la'asid David, which means Sphiris Malchus. Therefore, in the future, David, which is Sphiris Malchus, which corresponds to the name of Hashem called Ban, Hu Amavarech, he is the one that's going to bench, and not anyone else of the great tzaddikim of the past are going to be offered to bench Birchas Hamazon. Last paragraph on the page, very interesting association that the Rebbe is now going to make, and a contrast between Reuven and Yosef. Reuven being the firstborn of Yaakov, and Yosef being the firstborn of Rachel, and this is going to be connected as well with the male being primary now versus the feminine being primary when Mashiach comes. Last paragraph on the page. To be able to understand this and more explanation. In continuation to the Maimer that's entitled to understand the silver goblet, so that the continuation of that Maimer, it was at the time when the Rebbe said this Maimer in 65. It wasn't yet printed, it was only in manuscript. Before it's explained, at present, Reuven is considered the firstborn. Like it says, Ya'akov said on his deathbed, when he gave the brachas, he is my power, he is the first of my strength. When Mashiach comes, Yosef will be the firstborn. Why is that? Why is there this difference? Because Reuven is a firstborn to his father. When Mashiach comes, Yosef will be the firstborn because he is the firstborn to his mother. Because of this idea, the difference between the masculine and the feminine. Now the order is the mashpia, and then goes the makabel, the giver, and then the receiver. Therefore, the masculine, the male, who are ikir, that's what's primary. And therefore, Reuven was the firstborn to his father, he's considered the firstborn. Mash'enkin lost love as opposed to when Mashiach comes. That the feminine will be primary. Therefore, Yosef will be called the firstborn because he is the firstborn of his mother. This will be understood from what's explained that initially the service was with the Bechoros. Like we had in last week's parsha, that Yaakov asked Esav to sell his Bechorah to him, which means the honor and the privilege to be the one to serve Hashem in the Beis HaMikdash and so on, because that was the domain of the firstborn. Then things got messed up, and it was taken away from the Bechoros and was given to the Kohen. After the giving of the Torah and the sin of the Egel. Let's skip over after the brackets, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines beneath it, after the brackets. Nitla avoidam abchoris. So then the avoida was taken away from the firstborn after the sin of the golden calf, and v'nitla kohenim, it was given to the kohenim. And how come the who? since the avoida is the avoida of refining the sparks, that ma is the like we said before, ma has to do with Zeir Ampin and Yisoid and the higher spheres, the Mashpia. So he is the one that refines. That's what's primary now, the refinement of the sparks. Therefore, the masculine is what's primary. So it's not just primary in the fact that Reuven is the Bechor to his father, but also in Kayanim, it also follows the father, not the mother. Therefore, the avoid is with Kayanim. What's the difference between being a Kayan or being a Bechor? To determine if someone is a Kayan, that you have to look at the person's father. Therefore, the halacha is, if a Kayan marries a Levia or a Kayan marries Israelis, Azaya ben Kayan. The son is therefore a Kayan. We go according to the father. Therefore, the avodah at present is with a Kayan. But the firstborn that follows the mother, sanctify the one who opens every womb. What is that? So the mother determines who's going to be considered halachically the firstborn. The main thing is the mother. That's reflective of what's going to happen when Mashiach comes, that the female will surround and encompass and be higher than the male. And in a similar vein, that's the difference between Reuven versus Yosef. That's also the idea that now Reuven is the firstborn of his father, so he's the firstborn. As opposed to in the future, Yosef will be the firstborn because he's the firstborn for his mother. Because when Mashiach comes, Malchus, which is the idea of Ban, will be higher than Ma, which is Eiram. So now the Rebbe is going to pose a very simple thing. We know that Torah doesn't change, and the halachas always remain. This is a rule. This is one of the 13 principles that the Rambam established of the Yud Gimel Animaimins. Yud Gimel, the Yud Gimel Ikrim. So the Rebbe says in the second paragraph, though the Torah will not be changed. It says that you will not be able to give over the firstborn rights to the son of the beloved woman over the son of the hated woman if that son was born first. And the one that is the beloved woman when it comes to Yaakov was Rachel, Yosef, that her firstborn was Yosef, Vasnuhi Leah, and the hated one is Leah, Reuven. So therefore, how can you say when Mashiach comes, how can you say when Mashiach comes, Yosef will be the B'chayr, when the Torah rules that out? Over there, in that Maimer, in the beginning, it explains that in the nature of the firstborn, there are two components, and it depends what you're talking about. Aleph, Yerusha, one component is inheritance, who is going to inherit. Beis, Kedusha, the second one is sanctity and holiness. But Yosef is going to be the firstborn. Mashiach comes, that's only concerning sanctity. But concerning inheritance, Reuven will still be the firstborn concerning inheritance. But why, when it comes to holiness, will he take precedence? Like we said before, because Malchus, which is the feminine, will become revealed, the level of Arich, the part of Keser. Therefore, Mashiach comes, it'll be on a higher level. Now the Rebbe is going to add another point. Even though we just now made a distinction, that it depends if we're talking about inheritance or we're talking about sanctity. Even concerning inheritance, there will be a time when the inheritance will also go to Yosef. Also concerning the inheritance, Yosef will be the firstborn when Mashiach comes. This is not contradictory to the fact that the Torah will not be changed. Because when Mashiach comes, there will be two eras, like the Rebbe always emphasizes. The Tchila Yazman Shel Schar Al Avoid Shel Zman Hazeh She'avoid Saberurim She'aydim Ma'avar Ban. Initially will be the time that will be the reward for our service of the present time, that at the present times to avoid of refining the sparks. And that happens through Shema, that refines a level of Shemban. Shezeu in Yerusha. The idea of Berurim, refinement, has to do with inheriting, because the idea of Yerusha is Ha'oiris the Toyu, because we are inheriting the lights and the revelations and the sparks that fell from the world of Toyu. Yerushas Olam Chulu, inheriting that world of Toyu. Therefore, Reuven will be a firstborn concerning when it comes to inheritance, because we're still in the period as a result of the Berurim, that Berurim and refining the sparks has to do with inheritance. Skip the parentheses. After that first era will be a time beyond reward, till be even beyond the idea of time. Then there will be a new Torah comes out from me, and then will be the period of Nekeva, the Sayyid Gever, that the feminine and the female will surround and encompass the male. There will be the ascent of Malchus on its own, of its own volition. Then Shemban will be higher than Shema. It will exist not through the help and influence of Shema. Then Yosef will be also the firstborn in concerning inheritance. Now the Rebbe brings in also a very interesting idea about women giving birth when Mashiach comes. This is also what's brought down in Chazal. That when Mashiach comes, a woman will give birth every day. There are two explanations. One meaning is that all the multiple births that will take place every single day will be from one time that she's together with her husband. Through the first time that she's together, she will be able. This will give her to be able to give birth every single day for forever. And the second explanation is something very, very interesting. That completely, without any type of cohabitation, she will give birth daily without any need for union with her husband. This fits in exactly with the two spiritual things that we're talking about now. The Shnei Pirushim Melu, these two explanations, and B'Shnei Azmanim, the law said law, we have to do with the two times of Mashiach's times. Shebizman Harishan, at the first era, even though she will give birth daily, it needs the first cohabitation. This means she still needs the masculine. The second era of Mashiach's times, she won't need the masculine whatsoever, and she'll give birth on her own. This is also what Chazal say, that when Mashiach comes, Eretz Yisrael will give forth, the trees will give forth tasty cakes and ready-made linen garments, without plowing and sowing and toil, but on its own. And spiritually it corresponds, because Eretz Yisrael is Evinyan Malchus, Nukva. Eretz Yisrael corresponds to the sphere of Malchus, the level of the feminine. So this has to do with the idea how the feminine will be higher than the masculine. This is the reason why David will bench Birch Samazon when Mashiach comes. The forefathers of Ram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, when they'll be asked to bench, they will say, we don't want to bench. But David and David will actually say, for me it's appropriate to bench. Since then will come down the levels of the salvations, either 370 or 375 lights. The beginning of the chain order of descent. The first turn of Hashem to the worlds. Since they will come down to Malchus, therefore David, which is the sphere of Malchus, will be the one that will lead the benching. As opposed to now, it's Kaisi says so that the cup has to be raised up, Malchus has to be raised up because it doesn't have it on its own, it needs to receive. What we say that Yosef will be the firstborn in the future. That's not contradictory to what it says that in the future Yehuda is going to be the firstborn. That's why David was from the Shevet Yehuda. He says my servant David will be a leader for them forever. So it's a difference, again, whether you're looking at the mothers or the fathers. Since we're looking from the perspective of the mothers, the matriarchs, Shalos and the Kevet to save Gever, in the future, the female will surround and be higher than the male. Yosef is the firstborn. When you look not at the mothers, but you look at the Shvatim themselves, in the Yehuda represents Spheres HaMalchus, Apam Oides Hashem is the avoid of Yehuda, which is Malchus. So in that regard, he's the B'choyer. Therefore David, my servant, will be higher than them and appraised over them forever. Now getting back to the original question, the Maimer, what does Vayetze Yankiv have to do with the rest of what it says? That's what Yaakov says. This rock that I placed will be a monument, a home for Hashem. Tanya says that Evan signifies the level of Ban. Ban is the Malchus, the receiver, plus the letter of Aleph for reasons known to the Creator. Now it's like we say in Hallel that the level of Evan, the builders despised. It's the lower level. It needs to come on to something else. But in the future it'll be the head. Because of Evan, like it says, this is very same rock that was despised will be on the head. That's the difference in a time of exile to Mashiach's times. Now Malchus, its legs, is sent to death. Therefore, it needs to be raised up. As opposed to Mashiach's times. That's why this rock, which is a very lowly level, the level of Shem Ban, since it's going to become the level of Mashiach's times, will become a monument and a home and a level of house for Hashem. That this what Yaakov went out from Be'er Shava and he went to Charon. That's Yaakov leaving Be'er Shava to go out to Charon, the anger of Hashem in the world. And there, through refining it, he rises up higher and higher. Until when Mashiach comes, the level of Ban will be higher than Man. That's also what he concludes. That whatever you give me, I will give you a tenth of. It says twice, that goes on connected atik v'arach de keser. That corresponds to the two levels of keser, atik and arach. She's galo as malchus, because all those high levels, like we said before, of keser will become revealed in malchus. Because of that, David, my servant, will be a leader over them forever, because David is the level of Spheres HaMalchus.